Hello, this week I'm joined by the delightful Todd Baretz, who is a sex therapist, a author, a Instagram therapy sharer, I don't know. And we're talking about casual sex, relationship sex, hookups, all sorts of penis related shenanigans. Is that about right?
Yeah.
This is probably true. Please be aware that the following contains strong language and adult themes. It would be boring without them.
So, my story is about sex. I'm a sex therapist. People often think that because of that, I'm just like this sexual machine who's just so great at sex and no sexual issues. But I was in this 10-year relationship, and my story really starts there with my ex, Alex. We were monogamish, like we would have threesomes, even though I still kind of consider that monogamous, but most people say monogamish. We'd have threesomes, and they were fun, but I hadn't really hooked up with people on my own casually. When I was younger, I always liked casual sex, but we just had a really great sexual connection. So I was like, well, what's the point of putting in effort? I don't have time for that, whatever. But then the relationship ended, which was hard and heartbreaking and all of that stuff. And I figured that within that time together, I had really been able to explore my sexuality and figure out how I liked it, how hard I liked it, when I wanted. I thought I knew everything about my sexuality. I was like, I've been doing this for 10 years. I'm a pro. I got this. And then the relationship ended, and I was like, great, I'm going to be a slut. I'm going to go hook up with a bunch of people. I'm going to now finally be able to have sex and do all the things I want to do. My ex was more of a total top, and I was the default bottom, which for the most of my life, I just kind of assumed this like subby bottom role of a twink. And towards the end of the relationship, I was like, I don't want to be this twink. I'm not a twink. I don't want to do these things. I want to top. I want to do other things, whatever, which she was not into. So then I was like, I can finally live my versatile fantasy life and the people I want to and get blah, 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 blah. And then not so much. The relationship ended and I downloaded Grinder, which, mind you, Grinder wasn't around when I first got into my relationship. So I was like really excited, and I downloaded Grinder and I started talking with people, and it was so fucking difficult. One, logistically, it's a mind fuck because it's like you'd think that you have two horny people who are within 20 feet from one another, that it would just be easy to just take your clothes off, get off, and leave. But no, it's not. It takes days, which I was like, what the is going on? I had no patience. And then finally, after negotiating and compromising about schedule and what we would be doing, I would finally meet with somebody. They wouldn't look anything like their pictures, and I wouldn't be able to get aroused. And so this just kind of kept happening. Every hookup was some brand of different version of they smelled, they said something weird, they, became that smell, they became that something weird. It just wasn't easy for me. I was so used to having sex in the context of someone that I knew that, like, when my ex would make that weird noise or smell in a weird way, I wouldn't even think about it because I would know him. I'm like, yeah, that's just what he fucking does. But then when these strangers would come over, I had no background relational information on them. I didn't know who they were. So they were the noise, they were the smell, they were the fact that they didn't look like their pictures. So my ADD was just bouncing all over the place. We would be naked, someone would come in, it would either be a conversation or just around, which I honestly don't care one way or the other. But then my mind would start saying, well, they don't really look like their pictures, and what's that smell? And I don't understand. Why'd they just do that? It was just like impossible for me to be present. So I realized quickly after the casual sex why, while on the one hand, I really wanted to have lots of it, on the other hand, it was really, really difficult for me to be able to be present, for me to relax into just at least the physical sensations I was feeling and focus on that as opposed to the kink or dynamics that I had wanted to make it fun. I did have, of course, some good experiences that were really hot. And then I was like, oh, I want to do this again. And then, those experiences where things just seem to like match up, where you have the same kind of energy, where you're kissing and like your teeth clink and everything just feels like, you're making a face. What's the face? Teeth clink?
Teeth clinking, like, ooh, that's something that goes through me. Definitely that one.
You don't like that. I mean, like when you're making out and it's like really intense and like it's like kind of sloppy and you're just eating each other's face and your teeth kind of hit each other. I don't know. To me, it feels hot and it's kind of reflection. I mean, I don't mean in like this, my teeth are going to fall out kind of a way.
If it's in
excitement.
the heat of the moment and that, it can be quite
Yeah.
sexy and quite kind of like, "Ooh, yeah." But yeah, sometimes it's just that they're a bad kisser and they're trying to, like, bite your head,
Yeah,
and
not
it's not
that.
fun.
Where was I? I was yeah, some of it was good, but then it was interesting because I was like, "Well, that was great." My partner would be like, "Yeah, that was hot." I'm like, "Okay," and then I would text them after and be like, "When are we doing this again?" And then I, like, either wouldn't hear from them or, again, it would be, like, weeks of rescheduling, and by when that happens, I lose interest really quick because 'cause I'm like, "This is ridiculous, like, this is really not hard. We're talking about putting our inside of each other, like, you're either gonna show up or you're not gonna show up, like, why is this becoming such a thing? I have work, friends, a life. I can't be negotiating my appointments like this. Like, I don't have time." So then even the good ones, I would just like, they wouldn't even happen.
I'm glad it's not just me. Sometimes I'm like, "Oh, people are using Grindr and having a lot more fun with it," or they seem to be having a lot more
No,
fun and a lot more success with it than I'm having.
no.
And I'm really glad that it's not just me that's like, you turn it on when you're horny, like when you're thinking about sex, and then you've got to like negotiate over like 2 or 3 days to actually get around to meeting up with someone. And by then you're like, I had a wank 2 days ago. I'm not really into this anymore." Like,
It's a
ugh,
process. It's
it
so ridiculous. It's so time
you'd think it should
consuming.
be easy.
I was just so surprised by it. But I did that. I mean, I was voraciously horny. So I did it anyway. I had horrible hookups. I had one guy come over who just cried. And then I was like, I can't do this. Sorry. And then he cried more. And I'm a therapist. So I like, I'm like, oh, okay.
I hope you sent him an invoice afterwards.
I know I should. Eventually, I was like, okay, you gotta go. That didn't stop me. I really wanted to hook up.
I feel like, yeah, there'd be times in there when I'm like, you know what? Maybe celibacy's okay. Maybe I just
Yeah.
don't need, if this is all there is, maybe I'm all right without.
The next day, however, I got right back on that horse and tried again. I had a couple of people come over that like smelled so bad that the smell stayed on my sheets. Have you ever had that?
Not so much people's BO. Like the closest I'd say would be a slight digestive mishap. That smell
Yeah.
tends to cling sometimes. No matter how many times you wash your hands and the sheets and
Yeah.
stuff, there's a little bit of a thing. But like just off a guy in
No,
general,
like BO.
not really. I feel like,
Unlucky.
yeah, I think I'd be tempted in a very kind of British and polite way to be like, "Hey, do you know what would be really sexy? If we did this in the shower now."
I know. When I was
But
telling my therapist about all this, he's like, "I have an idea. If someone smells, take them to the shower." And I was like, "Ugh." I guess like the most actionable, most reasonable thing to do would be to just do that. But I suffered through instead. I was like, I'll just make it through.
you're a big brave soldier. Well done.
I am brave. I'm very courageous. I like the smell of BO. I
Okay.
just don't like it if it like lingers on my clean sheets.
There's nothing worse than a bad shag that then afterwards you're like, well, now these sheets were clean on yesterday, and now I've got to change them again.
So annoying.
Especially when the sex isn't even good. It's not so bad if great sex means, all right, now I've got to change my sheets.
Well, that's fine.
Yeah, but when it's like crap sex and then more laundry, it's like, "Oh, I could have had a wank and skipped all of this."
But I found that casual sex, I mean, it was like a game of roulette. Sometimes it was good, sometimes it was bad. When it was bad, it was like really bad. And when it was good, it was really good, which is the problem because then it's like, then you kind of keep going and you're trying to see what am I going to get this time. I did enjoy it. It was just so interesting to me because as a gay man, casual sex was like is like nutrition. It's like sold to us like this is drink your milk and whatever casually and go on Grindr or Scruff or now Sniffies. I don't know if you have Sniffies in London, but it's not that simple. It's not that easy. Sometimes it's not that pleasurable. Sometimes it's a mess. Sometimes it smells. It's really complicated, which I was really not prepared for such complexity for something so simplistic, I thought. Even though I'm a sex therapist and I'm like, sex is really complicated, it's never simple, I still nonetheless thought it would be as simple as, get hard, get off, goodbye. But it really wasn't. It was difficult for me and coming to that realization because I ended my relationship because it had to end, right? And I was like, this is the most empowering thing I could do for myself. I'm going to grow. I'm going to become a whore. I'm going to get into another relationship and, great. And not so much. I realized that in my relationship, I was actually having better sex than I was having with these strangers, even the good times, because I wasn't really fully able to be myself. And I wasn't really sure if the other person was being themselves. It was a dynamic that was on the one hand arousing, but on the other hand so fucking like mysterious and unknown and not fully realized that it's not that I didn't enjoy casual sex, but that it became more of like an intellectual experiment of studying what like sex was even like these days as an adult with other adults, which is something that no
Yeah.
one talks about. People are like, oh, it was good or it was bad, but no one really talks, or like, oh, they didn't look like their pictures. But like, What we're really talking about is what's it like to experience pleasure or to pursue pleasure, and whether or not you're able to have it. And we often talk about it in terms of who we're that it's like they give it to us, but it's really ourselves. Like I didn't notice how anxious I actually was because all of this focus on the smell and the this and the that. While on the one hand it was gross, on the other hand it was a lot of anxiety. I wasn't able to settle in because I was really looking for all of these different things to tell me if this was going to be a good hookup or a bad hookup. And then even afterwards, I put so much expectation on the good hookups that they would happen again that they never happened again, and then it served to just reinforce my experience. So as a gay man, I felt like I was lied to. What I was interesting is that when it was good, I was like, "Goo, goody! I want to do this again. That was hot as." And then I just assumed that the other person would too, and then they'd be like, "Yeah, that was hot, so hot, blah blah," and like describe why it was hot. And we're like, "Yeah, we're all in agreement. This was fucking hot, and that we should do this again." And then it would like never happen, or it would happen and it wouldn't be good, which I was like, which was even more confusing. I don't know if that's happened to you, but then when I'm like bored by this person because I've already hooked up with them once, they come over and they're like completely different, and they come over and they're all like weird and awkward and like I'm like, what's going on here? As if they've like suddenly developed feelings, or maybe it's me, and they've become this known entity, and it's no longer as exciting because we know each other. Meaning we f***ed once, and now there's nothing left to be had. But it's really interesting. I mean, especially just coming from the place of being in the relationship and anticipating that my casual sex experiences would just be fabulous, and I could be a whore and slut it up and do all the things I was missing, and then I realized that I really wasn't missing anything. Yeah, it wasn't necessarily better. The grass is not always greener.
Having repeat customers who are not as good the second time round, do you think perhaps that part of it could be the novelty of the first time? Like they're hooking up with a hot person, you're hooking up with a hot person, you're all having a great time. And then after that, like some of the novelty's worn off? Or do you think maybe it's, oh God, I'm seeing this person again. Does this mean something? Is this like the beginning of a relationship? Maybe do I want the relationship? Blah, 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 rather than just going, yes, that orgasm was fun. I'd like to do that again soon, please. Do you think there's some thinking of it in that kind of way? Like you're not meant to fuck more than once. If you fuck more than once, then it's a relationship. Blah, kind of.
You're
Uh,
not meant to. That's funny.
yeah.
I think it's probably all of the above. I mean, a lot of people focus on this whole novelty thing, which I don't know. My inclination is to say no about the novelty thing because it's not necessarily about novelty. I think it's about the absence of or not the absence, but more of a presence of some kind of a relational or intimate dynamic. Because when it's with a stranger, there's still a relational dynamic. It's just more built around anonymity and it being casual. But then it's no longer anonymous, right? So you know the other person, you know what their body looks like. It's not necessarily about it being a new body, but it's about the sense of discovering. So, in the absence of the ability to discover, I think some people retreat or become bored or change, and so that can really have an impact. But the reality or the funny thing is that we're talking about like sex for the second time, not like sex for the 50th time, and you're like, oh, there's nothing left to discover here. What are we going to do, whips and chains next? I don't know. It's really, I think, a lot more about anxiety, a lot more about so many different things that are more just like, well, I already know what their is like, so it's boring, because that's ridiculous, right? We can have
I
sex with
would hope so.
somebody,
Yeah.
yeah, and enjoy it, even if we know what they look like. Which is funny. Sometimes people are like, I don't want to show you because I want to be surprised. It's like, what?
I mean, I
You
kind of
want the
subscribe to that a little
surprise?
bit myself. I'd rather, I mean, I'd rather on Grinder
I don't want
see
to be surprised.
artful. I know it's not so much about surprise. A dick's a dick. If it's surprising, then you should probably see a doctor or a priest. But it's more the seduction and the art of the
Mhm.
tease, the building up to the shagging. If you're just like whapping out your dick straight away, I'm like, oh yeah, it's a penis. And I don't see a dick pic as a tool towards getting a shag out of me. I'd rather one send photos of them like in what sexy photos, what they consider to be sexy rather than
Mhm.
explicit. It doesn't need to have your knob out. It could just be like you posing artfully, doing some interesting shadow play or flexing in an interesting way.
Yeah.
Something that makes me want more rather than just a penis. But I know what you mean. Like it's a dick. They all look the same, more or less.
They don't all look the same.
No? Okay.
No. And butts and bodies and faces, and everyone looks different. At least, I mean, but this is just goes to show you how different people are in terms of how they
Yeah.
experience and express themselves sexually and what's a turn on and what's not a turn on. But all of this stuff was so new to me. I didn't know that I was like about to embark on this new sexual adventure. It was so fucking weird. I thought like it's just gonna be the same old shit again, but not so much.
Yeah. And so how have you navigated that kind of thing? Like what do you do now that changes that kind of thing? Like
Nothing.
how are you getting through it?
Yeah.
Nothing?
I'm not. Well, I'm in a relationship now that's monogamous, so and I'm enjoying the sex that I'm having with my new partner. But I before that I
Cool.
was single for 6 years, which was a long time, and as somebody who likes to be in a relationship. But so it was just 6 years of a lot of mediocre sex. I mean, and with the exception where sometimes I would have really hot sex and not be distracted by a smell or something. But it really just felt like a game of luck. Like, I mean, it didn't feel like there was anything I could do other than really be very selective or meet people out first to try to see if there was like a flirt, a vibe, or something sexy that could maybe happen to set the stage first beyond just reducing someone down to what they look like or their or whatever, because that's really what you're doing. I mean, you're just having sex with a body, and the anonymity is the thing that at times can be super erotic. But in the absence of someone fulfilling every single characteristic that turns you on, which is never going to happen, it was helpful for me to start filling in some of the blanks, some of the relational blanks, to hear them say a sentence before they're my in their mouth and down their throat, or to know what they did, or to know where they lived or where they were from before we were naked. And then there was those times where it was just like, okay, clothes off, let's go. But again, it was really just like, I think, a game of luck. I mean, I really just it was just about me being horny, and you win some, you lose some. Yeah.
Yeah, what would you say your win-loss ratio was towards the end?
I was in the losing team. I mean, I refer to myself as a sexual neurotic, and that's just because literally everything turns me off about people. And not everybody is like that. What I'm talking about is these things called accelerators and brakes. Brakes are the things that turn us off, accelerators are things that often turn us on. Sometimes we have high brakes, sometimes we have high accelerators, sometimes high both. I have high, high, high brakes. And so, like, every little thing will turn me off. But so my brakes are constantly on brake. How do cars work? And not everybody is like this, but I'm particularly neurotic when it comes to how I can become turned on. So it was hard for me. Like, the moon and the stars need to fucking align for me to get a boner unless I'm taking Viagra. And then like the person has to like do and say all the right things, and it's a whole thing for me.
It almost becomes a kind of test. Like how like can you will you make it through the gauntlet or a gauntlet of turning me on and then doing and saying the right things and having the right kind of sex with me in order for me to reach the goal of an orgasm, or are you gonna like get halfway and then do or say the wrong thing and ruin it? And yeah, it's a little bit kind of Indiana Jonesy. I like that. Like
Yeah, it is Indiana Jones. Lots of pits and black holes to fall
yeah.
into.
I like the idea of brakes and accelerators. If something mildly off-putting happens, it can slow things down, but it doesn't mean that things are going to stop immediately. Yeah, sometimes it's possible for to recover. Like it might have slowed down a bit, but it's not actually stopped, as opposed to like full on. That's it, done.
Oh, yeah, it's never just a full slam.
More's the pity.
Yeah. It's usually just a slowing down, which is not fun.
Mhm.
If you're going slow
No.
and you're like, I want to fast and come now. And your body is like, nope, sorry, not you want to go there, but I don't. Like, sorry.
Did you find as well that hookups, if you met in person rather than through the apps, were along the same lines? You say you were out in a bar and someone kind of caught your eye and you started chatting. Would you find that it was the same kind of thing, or would it be because you've had that little chat to start with and they become a bit more human that it would affect the sex afterwards?
Well, that was the other thing. Like, I don't drink that much, and I'm like grandparent, and because of my work schedule, I go to bed so early, so I don't really go out anymore. I don't go to clubs or bars or like big warehouse parties or raves. So I wasn't really in context where I would meet people out and about, which when I have the few times I have, it's like really fun and exciting. And I feel like, oh, we would, and this would be hot. When I started dating more, if I actually liked the person, I could have better sex than just like a random casual person. And whenever
Yeah.
I would talk to my therapist, he would always say, "Well, look, you're not as superficial as you think you are." Like, I guess
It's a
that's
good
true.
thing.
I'm so real. I'm such a realie.
Congratulations. But I know what you mean. Like going out and meeting people outside involves effort and money and time, not all of which we have all the time, and certainly not
No,
at the
I'm
same time enough to
tired.
go out and do it. And the number of times, I mean, speaking of myself, I've gone out and I've not bumped into anyone or started chatting to anyone that I've been that interested in, or someone that I was chatting to turned out to like have nothing to say and that kind of thing. And I come home and I'm like, well, that was a waste of makeup. I could have stayed in and saved my evening, but maybe that's just me.
No, I'm tired. I have too much to do. I don't, as I said, I don't really drink and I don't stay up late. So that was a huge barrier for me. And for
Yeah.
dating, for sex, for everything, really. For friends,
Just
it can be a
life
problem.
generally.
For life,
Yeah.
yeah.
As you've mentioned, you're a sex therapist. If anyone is listening to this and considers themselves to be in a similar boat, they're kind of going, "Oh my god, yeah, that's me too. Oh,
Mhm.
that's so true." Blah blah. What advice would you have for them? How would you recommend that they go about adjusting for the kind of stuff we've been talking about?
What I'm saying is nothing is not unique to me. Everyone has some version of this with their experiences of casual sex or just sex in general or their bodies. But so, I mean, we have to figure out what works for us and what works for our bodies and what turns us on the most and what turns us off, and to really make sure that we're tending to both or all three. So the things, the context, the relational context that are most conducive for us to feel comfortable, to decrease our anxiety, and also the variety of things that turn us off and turn us on, and to really do our best to try to curate all of those as best as we possibly can. But also to just accept the fact that sometimes we have bad sex and that's totally fine. I think a lot of people feel shame about the fact that they're not like fucking and screaming, having screaming orgasms every day, or not having enough sex, especially gay men. And the reality is that everybody has sexual problems, everybody has sexual challenges. Casual sex is not always good, and there's nothing wrong with you or your partner. It's just hard. But the best thing you can do is to just know your body and your genitals as best as you possibly can, so you can get yourself off and do whatever you need and engage with people in ways that will be most arousing.
Actually thinking about what is it that I want out of this. And sometimes I found when I started doing this, a lot of the time I just wanted the human contact. I was feeling lonely, or I was a bit sad,
Mhm.
or I was just I wanted to interact with someone in a specific way. It didn't have to be about the sex, but just that because we're gay and that's how it works, sex was the easiest way to get that kind of interaction and that kind of thing. Not always. Yeah, there's knowing what you're actually after and not just assuming that, oh, I must be horny because all we do is fuck. Blah blah
That isn't that all we do? I thought that's what
I
our
mean,
purpose was.
there's brunch too, you know?
Brunch, boozy brunch, right. But also, like, there's a lot of shame about people having sex for the wrong reasons. Like, you shouldn't have sex if you're just because you're lonely. That would be have sex if you're lonely. Have sex if you just want to be touched. That's totally fine. I think people often say, well, you should only have sex if you're truly horny, which is just people have sex for a variety of different reasons. So long as you're safe and you're getting consent, it doesn't matter the reason. I know that many people will disagree with that, but
As long as everyone's enjoying it, I think is the thing. Like if you're doing it for the wrong reasons, you might not be enjoying it, but that's part of the conversation you have to have with yourself beforehand. I've found as well that the kind of wrapped up in that shame is also learning to use your words and actually speak your needs can be quite daunting at times. It's like, oh, I'm not really enjoying this, but I also don't want to have to say anything because I'll feel awkward or maybe that's a British thing where we just don't talk about things ever. Like everything is fine. Go away. Yes, of course it's fine.
well, it is particularly British, but I mean, it's particularly about a sexual thing too, where when your partner is saying, "How is this?" and you're like, "Fine," and you're in deep pain, or it's just like gross. Or, I mean, when I was younger, I used to have guys come over and not want to hook up with them and go through it anyway, just to get it done with. And I'm like, well, they're here, like whatever, I'll just get off with them, and just really struggle through my 20s or my when I was a teenager and earlier very early 20s. And even when I got out of my relationship, I'd be like, well, they're here. Okay, I guess. And even during, if I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore, sometimes I would just try to like get off quicker so I could get them out. And like, I'm a sex therapist. If I had a client tell me that, I'd be like, well, this is something to do next time, blah, blah, blah. But the reality is when someone's there, it's really hard to be like, this isn't working for me, get out. Obviously, you say it nicely and there's a way to do it. But it can be really hard to try to stop a hookup and to tell someone to leave. It's hard stuff.
Like you said, you were having threesomes in your relationship. in a kind of monogamish kind of way.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to hear how, as a long-term relationship, like you and your partner navigated that particular thing. Because I know for some people, if their partner of a long time turned around and said, "I'd like to invite someone else into the bedroom," essentially, there might be issues of like, "Oh, am I not doing it right? Am I not enough for them? Like, are they going to leave me?" Blah 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 blah.
Well, it just so happened that both of us were kind of voyeurs and exhibitionists, so we really like to be watched or watch. And so before we started having threesomes, I know it kind of just like worked out well in that sense, which is why, we had such a good social connection and it was easy to sustain over a long period of time, which for most people desire declines and then it's like it's done. And then like fights but that was never really our story. So we were both into being watched or doing the watching. And so we would fantasize about an imaginary third when we'd be having sex together for a while. And then eventually that just kind of went into going online and chatting with people. And then that's just kind of, what do people say? Spitballed? No. Snowballed? What's wrong with me? Snowballed into having a third person actually be there. But it just kind of worked out. I mean, of course, like jealousy would come up and but not in any sort of extremely threatening way. But then we would talk about it, and then it would be even hot to talk about the threesome after the threesome was over. So that was pretty hot. Towards the end, the threesomes were, I think, symbolic of more than just having fun or having someone watch us. But when we started having threesomes, it was just kind of really erotic and hot.
Sounds delightful.
Delightful.
Is that not a word you would use to describe a threesome?
It will be now.
Like you were saying earlier, it comes down to like using your words and feeling comfortable enough to use those words, which can be difficult with a stranger, and like even more so sometimes with someone that you're in a relationship with. But like if their relationship is healthy, there should be room for that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. There's like kind of two different types of people. One person who expresses themselves sexually best within the context of something that's emotionally intimate. So, a long-term relationship where they're close with their partner, we assume that just because you're in a long-term relationship, you're close, but let's go with that. Or someone who expresses themselves best where they're not known, where it's anonymous, where there's no emotional intimacy. Neither is better or worse. It's just often a pattern for people. Another ridiculous rule and myth that people think is, if you have sex the first time you meet, it's not going to be a relationship, which I hate. It's such a straight thing to say too, because it's so based on like all these old heteronormative, traditional, outdated values. But you can meet somebody and end up in a relationship with them from them the first time you meet them, just so people know.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with sex being an early, if not the first part of a relationship, and seeing where you go from there. It's going to be part of it anyway. It's just as important as the other bits, I suppose.
Yeah, I tell people to have sex right away. I mean, what's the point of waiting? Sometimes if you wait to have sex with somebody, it can be very easy for the relationship to become desexualized, where there's like not a lot of sexiness, not a lot of flirtiness. And by sex, I don't mean necessarily f***ing, I just mean like being naked. So many bullshitty rules about sex, which is all just fear and anxiety.
Very wise words.
I know.
I think that is a good place to segue into the bit where we pay the bills. So, you've got a book coming out. Tell us all about that.
I have a book coming out. It's called How to Love Someone Without Losing Your Mind. And spoiler alert, you're going to lose your mind. It is about my ex, the relationship over the past 10 years, how it unfolded. It's about my clients' relationships and sex lives, and it's about sex and relationships culturally. So I tell a story about my relationships and my clients' relationships and relationships in general. And it's juicy and helpful all at the same time.
And it's called How to Love Someone Without Losing Your Mind.
Yep.
And that's available from the link that will be in the show notes and probably all good bookshops and probably some really dodgy ones as well, because why not?
All of them.
And if people want to follow you, find out more, see what you look like find some nuggets of your wisdom, where are you on the internet as well?
You can find me on my Instagram at YourDiagNonsense.
I think that's pretty much everything. Is there anything we've missed? Anything you want to add or change or whatever?
I don't want people to hear this and think that my preferences are related to how everyone's preferences should be. Like, I think people think sex therapists, and then I'm saying, these are my kinks, this is what I like, this is what I don't like. And that has a way of inadvertently shaming people because they think I'm some authority figure on sex, which I am. But I'm talking specifically about my sexuality, my specific things that turn me on, the things that turn me off, not anybody else. So it's just important that I make that clear because I think, people are pretty suggestible and have a way of hearing these things and thinking this is how I should be doing, or I don't like that, or I like this and it turns him off. This is bad. No, everyone, these are my preferences and my preferences don't have to be everyone's, which I know might sound obvious, but I think oftentimes, since I am a therapist and since I am a place that people are going to for advice, they have trouble separating the two. So I just want to make sure that those are separated.
See, whereas because I'm not a therapist, but I am a podcaster and YouTuber, my opinions are correct. And if you're not doing it the way I like, then you're doing it wrong, and you should be ashamed.
Yes.
Because I can say that.
Exactly. Yeah.
That was Probably True, the LGBTQ plus storytelling project created to remind all of our queer siblings that we are none of us alone. If you liked it, then comment, share, subscribe, and join the Patreon. Or just tell all your friends. If you didn't like it, tell me. Come at me, bro.